They didn't burn the check in front of me. They were smarter than that. They waited until I left the room, but I heard it. That specific sound, paper tearing, is something your brain files away forever when you understand what was on the other side of it. $5 million. My grandmother's entire life, 53 years of teaching elementary school in rural Mississippi, 112 acres of land she'd inherited from her own mother, and quietly sold piece by piece over 4 decades, reinvesting every dollar because she said land was God's gift, but compound interest was God's hint. And my aunt and uncle ripped it in half over a kitchen trash can while I was in the hallway bathroom washing my hands. They thought the water was still running. It wasn't. I stood in that hallway for 11 seconds. I counted because something in my brain needed to hold on to something precise, and I made a decision so quietly that it didn't even feel like a decision. It felt like a door closing. My name is Serena Mabry Cole. I am 28 years old, and what happened in the 14 months after that hallway moment is the reason I am sitting here today, in an office I own, with a view I chose, telling you a story about what it actually costs to steal from someone who was paying attention. Stay with me, because this one doesn't end where you think it ends. It ends somewhere so much better. Welcome to Soulful Drama Stories. I am genuinely glad you are here for this one because I need you to be present for every single part of what I'm about to tell you. This is not a story about money, not really. Money is just the language this particular betrayal chose to speak in. This is a story about a woman who built a kingdom quietly, in the background, while everyone around her underestimated what she was doing, and what happened when the people who were supposed to carry her legacy forward decided they'd rather spend it, and what happened when the one person they never saw coming decided to see everything. Get comfortable. Turn off what you don't need. This one runs deep and it runs long, and every single minute of it is worth it. Let me tell you about my grandmother first, because without understanding her, nothing else in this story makes sense. Her name was Dorothy Eugenia Mabry, born 1941 in Greenwood, Mississippi, third of 7 children. Father worked the railroad, mother took in laundry, and taught herself to read from the Bible and a mail-order dictionary, which Dorothy always said was the most impressive academic achievement in the family's entire history, including her own master's degree. Dorothy got that master's degree in education at Jackson State University in 1967. She went back to Greenwood and taught 4th grade for 31 years at the same elementary school where she herself had learned to read. She knew every family in that county by name. She went to every funeral. She brought food to every new baby. She was the kind of woman that a town builds itself quietly around, without ever formally deciding to. She married my grandfather, James Mabry, in 1969. He was a gentleman, a deacon, a carpenter who built furniture that lasted and never overcharged anyone, and died of a heart attack at 61, leaving Dorothy with the house, the land, $32,000 in savings, and the specific quiet strength of a woman who had always known she could do things alone. She just preferred not to. After James died, Dorothy changed. Not in the way grief breaks people, in the way grief clarifies people. She became deliberate about money in a way she'd never had to be while James was alive. She started reading books, financial magazines, newsletters she ordered through the mail in the early days, and later found online when her granddaughter, me, taught her how to navigate the internet at age 71, with the focus of someone learning a second language. She sold the first parcel of land in 2003, 40 acres on the eastern edge of the property, to a developer. She took that money and she called a financial advisor in Jackson, a woman named Mrs. Loretta Fines, and she said, "I am not a sophisticated investor. I am a school teacher, but I am not stupid. Explain this to me like I'm intelligent, not like I'm wealthy." Mrs. Loretta Fines would later tell me that in 40 years of practice, Dorothy Mabry was one of the 3 sharpest clients she had ever worked with. Over the next 18 years, Dorothy sold parcels deliberately, never in panic, never from pressure, always when the price was right and the reinvestment was planned. She lived in the same house, drove the same Honda for 11 years, clipped coupons until she was 80 years old, not because she had to, but because waste offended something deep in her character. By the time I turned 24, my grandmother was 80 years old, living alone in the house in Greenwood, and worth somewhere between $4 and $6 million. Almost nobody in the family knew. She had told one person. She had told me.
I need to tell you about how Dorothy and I got close, because it matters. I grew up in Memphis. My mother, Claudette Mabry Cole, was Dorothy's youngest child. She was warm and scattered and perpetually in the middle of some creative project or another. She painted, she made jewelry. She once spent 8 months building a small pottery business that she loved and then walked away from because she got interested in something else. She was genuinely wonderful in 1,000 ways and genuinely unreliable in the specific ways that matter for a child who needs structure. My father left when I was 9. Not dramatically, just incrementally and then completely. So summers were Dorothy's house in Greenwood, from age 9 through 18. Long, slow Mississippi summers with sweet tea on the porch and the specific sound of crickets at night that is different from every other place on earth. Dorothy taught me to cook. She taught me to keep a budget journal. She made me balance a mock checkbook every week with an allowance system she'd designed that required me to divide my money into categories: spending, saving, giving, and account for every dollar before I got the next week's amount. Money is not a mystery, she told me once, sitting at her kitchen table while I reconciled my little notebook with the intensity of a child who wants to get something right. It is just a record of decisions. You understand your decisions, you understand your money. I was 12 years old. I understood her completely. I went to the University of Memphis, accounting degree. I was not the loudest person in my program, but I was the most thorough. My professors had a specific thing they'd say about my work: exhaustively documented. My spreadsheets had footnotes. My financial models had assumption logs. I annotated everything. One professor told me in my junior year, "Serena, you document things like you expect someone to challenge them." I said, "I document things like I expect to be right." She laughed. She gave me an A and a job referral. I came home to Memphis at 22, started at a mid-size accounting firm called Presley and Dunn, did exactly what you do when you're building something real. I kept my head down, did excellent work, and paid close attention to everything around me. Every month, I drove to Greenwood on a Sunday. 2 hours each way, sweet tea on the porch, Dorothy's kitchen table, my grandmother and me talking about everything. She started including me in her financial conversations when I was 23. Not all of it at first, just questions, the way she'd always done. "What do you think about this, baby? Tell me what you see." She would show me a statement, an investment report, a property valuation. She wanted my eyes on things. She trusted my eyes. By the time I was 24, I knew almost everything. Here is what I also knew about the rest of the family. Dorothy had 2 other children besides my mother. The oldest was my Uncle Gerald Mabry, 57 years old. Big man, loud laugh, the kind of person who fills a room by volume. He had lived in Atlanta for 20 years. He worked in real estate. Not successfully, with a string of projects that had mostly underperformed, but he talked about them with the confidence of a man who had done much better. His wife, Aunt Renata, matched him precisely. Loud, stylish, perpetually performing a prosperity that the actual numbers wouldn't support if you looked. I knew this because numbers were how I saw everything. Gerald and Renata came to Greenwood twice a year, Christmas and Easter. They arrived with gifts and big energy, and Gerald always told my grandmother how good she looked and asked if she needed anything, with the specific solicitude of someone who wanted credit for offering without the inconvenience of being taken up on it. The middle child was my Uncle Winston, 54, who lived in Nashville, worked in insurance, and was quiet in a way that I had always read as gentleness, but would later understand was something else. He went along with things.
He was the kind of man who stood behind a crowd's decision because having his own felt like too much work. My mother, Claudette, was the youngest and the closest to Dorothy in the daily sense. She called every few days, she visited more than Gerald and Renata, she was present in the soft ways. But she was also entirely disorganized about money and had borrowed from Dorothy twice over the years, in amounts she had partially repaid and then stopped discussing. Dorothy loved all three of her children, but she trusted one of her grandchildren. And Gerald and Renata, who had been watching Dorothy's quality of life very carefully for several years, had figured out that Dorothy had more money than she let on. What they had not figured out was exactly how much, or that I already knew. Right here, before we go any further, if this story is already pulling you in, please hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the notification bell. Soulful Drama Stories is a community for people who believe that the truth always has a longer reach than the lie. We are growing every single week, and I don't want you to miss what's coming. Subscribe now, then come right back, because this is where the story gets dangerous. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Tuesday in March. I was 26. I drove to Greenwood on a Tuesday because Dorothy had called me the night before and said, "I need to talk to you about something, baby. Not on the phone. Come when you can." She was sitting at the kitchen table when I arrived, tea already made, 2 mugs. She had a manila folder in front of her that I didn't recognize. She looked smaller than she had the last time I'd seen her, the way people look when something has been weighing on them for a while. Gerald called me last week. He wants me to restructure my estate documents. He says he's spoken to a financial planner in Atlanta who thinks I need a family trust, with him as the managing trustee, to protect the assets from taxes. I sat down. I looked at the folder. "Did he send you anything in writing?" "He sent me papers, a whole packet, said I should sign before April 15th because of tax timing." She paused. "He also said that since you're young and don't have experience with this level of asset management, I should let him handle the administrative side." She looked at me with her 80-year-old eyes that had 31 years of fourth graders in them and said simply, "What do you think?" I picked up the folder. I read every page. It took me 22 minutes. Dorothy refilled my tea. When I put it down, I chose my words carefully. "Grandma, this document would give Uncle Gerald full discretionary control of your liquid assets and a co-ownership position in any remaining property, with himself listed as primary beneficiary administrator." Dorothy looked at me steadily. "In plain language," she said, "in plain language, if you sign this, he controls the money and can make distributions, including to himself, with limited oversight." She was quiet for a moment. "I thought that's what it said. I just wanted to hear you say it." She picked up the folder. She held it for a moment. Then she put it down. "I'm not signing that," she said. "Good," I said. "But now I need to think about what I am going to do, because Gerald is going to push. He's been building to something for 2 years. I can feel it." She was right. She could always feel things before they showed themselves. "Then let's get ahead of it," I said. "What does that look like?" I looked at my grandmother across the table where I had balanced fake checkbooks at age 12 and learned that money was just a record of decisions. "It looks like getting your actual estate documents airtight before he knows you're moving," I said. "It looks like you making your intentions completely clear in ways that are legally protected. And it looks like you telling me everything, every account, every asset, every document, so that if anything ever happens, I know exactly what should exist." Dorothy looked at me for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over mine. "I was going to do all of that anyway. I just needed to know you were ready." We spent 4 hours at that table. By the time I drove back to Memphis, I knew everything. Here is what happened in the 4 months after that Tuesday. Dorothy contacted her existing estate attorney, a man named James Beaumont in Jackson, who had handled her documents for 12 years. She updated her will with precise, specific language. She established a properly structured trust, not the one Gerald had sent, a real one, reviewed by Beaumont and a second attorney she hired specifically for a second opinion, naming me as the primary trustee and beneficiary of the bulk of her estate, with specific monetary gifts designated for each of her children. Each child would receive $100,000, clear, specific, documented. The trust structure that protected the remaining assets, approximately $4.8 million in investment accounts, the remaining land parcel, and her home, was designed to disperse to me in stages for the purpose of continuing her investment philosophy, with a specific written instruction from Dorothy that I have framed on my wall today. I'll tell you what it says at the end of this story. Dorothy also, at my suggestion, did something specific and deliberate. She did not tell Gerald. She did not tell Winston. She did not tell my mother. She sent each of them a warm letter explaining that she had updated her estate documents with her attorney and that everything was in order. No specifics, just handled. Gerald called her 2 days after she sent the letter. I was sitting with her when the phone rang. She answered it on speaker, a thing she had started doing during our visits so I could hear without her having to relay everything. Gerald's voice came through warm, smooth, careful. "Mama, I got your letter. I'm glad you got things organized. Did you end up going with the structure I sent over?" "I went with my attorney. It's all taken care of." A pause. Short, but I heard it. "Did you have Serena look at it? Because Serena, bless her heart, she's a good girl, but this level of Gerald, just his name, the same way she'd always said it when she was done with a conversation. Yes, ma'am. I've been managing this money before you were thinking about money. It's handled. I love you. Say hello to Renata." She hung up. She looked at me. 2 weeks, she said. He'll be here in 2 weeks. She was off by 4 days. Gerald and Renata arrived on Saturday, unannounced, with a fruit basket and a man in a gray suit they introduced as Marcus Webb, a family financial specialist from Atlanta. I was not supposed to be there. I was there anyway. Dorothy had called me Thursday and said, "Come Sunday, baby, just come." I arrived Sunday morning. Gerald's rental car was already in the driveway. I walked into the house and the temperature of the room told me everything before anyone spoke. Gerald was at the kitchen table with Marcus Webb. Renata was standing near the counter with a posture that was trying to be casual and achieving something closer to tightly coiled. My grandmother was in her chair at the head of the table with her hands folded and her face arranged in the specific expression she used when she was allowing someone to finish a sentence she'd already answered in her head. Gerald saw me, and his smile did something complicated. "Serena, hey girl, didn't know you'd be here." "I come most Sundays," I said pleasantly. Marcus Webb explained his services for 11 minutes. He was polished. He had materials, he used phrases like generational wealth optimization and family legacy positioning and simplified administrative structure, and every single phrase was pointed at the same thing the original document was pointed at, getting Dorothy's signature on something that moved control to Gerald. When Marcus Webb finished, Dorothy looked at him politely. "Mr. Webb," she said, "I appreciate you coming all this way. I have an attorney. My documents are in order. I won't be needing additional services." Marcus Webb looked at Gerald. Gerald leaned forward. And then he said the thing. "Mama, I'm just worried about you. You're 80 years old, you're out here alone, and you've got significant assets that could be at risk if something happened to you suddenly. We just want to protect the family." Dorothy looked at her son for a long moment. "Gerald," she said, "I love you, but I know the difference between protecting me and protecting access to what's mine. Always have." The room went very quiet. Marcus Webb collected his materials. He and Gerald exchanged a look. Renata excused herself to use the restroom. I stayed at the table with my grandmother. We heard them in the hallway, voices low, but the house was small and old, and the walls carried sound. Gerald's voice. "She's got that girl in her ear. We need to move before." Renata. "Can we just talk to her about the check? She already signed the one for Beaumont, right? If we could just get her to write." Gerald. Keep your voice down. Then a door, and then quiet. They stayed for dinner. My grandmother cooked. The meal was warm and ordinary on the surface, in the way that only family meals with deep undercurrents manage to be. Gerald laughed at his own jokes. Renata admired the kitchen. Marcus Webb had gone back to his hotel. After dinner, I helped Dorothy with the dishes. The others were in the living room. Dorothy leaned close to me at the sink and said quietly, "They're going to try something else. I don't know what yet, but I can feel it moving." "I know," I said. "You've seen everything. You know where everything is." "I know where everything is." She dried her hands on the dish towel and looked at me. "Then, whatever comes, you'll be ready." I drove home that night with something settled in me that was not quite peace and not quite dread. It was readiness. Stay with me right here, because the next part of this story is where I need to give you something real, something beyond the drama, something you can actually use. If you are watching this and there is someone in your life who is pressuring an elderly relative about finances, a parent, a grandparent, an aunt, or uncle, what you just heard described has a name. It's called financial elder abuse, and it is one of the most common and least prosecuted forms of financial crime in this country. The pressure tactics, the outside specialists, the urgency around signing, these are patterns. If you recognize them, you don't need to wait for something to go wrong before you act. You get ahead of it the way Dorothy and Serena did, with attorneys, with documentation, with someone trustworthy who knows the full picture. This is Soulful Drama Stories. We don't just tell stories here. We give you something to carry out the door. If that matters to you, subscribe right now. Leave a comment. Tell me what this story is bringing up for you. I read every single one. Now, back to Serena, because Dorothy was right. They tried something else, and it was worse than any of us expected. 6 weeks after the Sunday dinner, Dorothy had a fall. Not serious, a misstep in the hallway, a bruised hip, 2 days at the county hospital, home within the week. But Gerald used it like a crowbar. He was in Greenwood within 48 hours of the hospital call. He came with Renata, he came with concern and presence, and the particular urgency of someone who has been waiting for a vulnerability and has just found one. By the time I got there, I left Memphis the morning after the hospital call. Gerald and Renata were already installed in the guest room. I cannot fully describe the next 3 weeks in that house, except to say that it was the longest 3 weeks of my life, and I understand now why water torture works. It is not the dramatic event that breaks you. It is the slow, steady pressure of small moments accumulating into something unbearable. Gerald was so helpful. He drove Dorothy to her follow-up appointments, he fixed a leaky faucet, he made her laugh at dinner. He was the best version of himself, performed with the precision of someone who had decided that the performance was an investment. Renata worked on Dorothy differently, softly, warmly, in the language of family and legacy and what Mama would want. She talked about Gerald's kids, Dorothy's grandchildren in Atlanta, whom Dorothy loved and didn't see enough. She talked about how nice it would be if Dorothy could be closer to family, if maybe she thought about simplifying her life a little, letting people help. And then, on a Wednesday evening, I came downstairs from the guest room where I'd been working on a client file and found Dorothy at the kitchen table with Gerald and a document in front of her and a pen in Gerald's hand extended toward her. I stood in the doorway. Gerald looked up. His face did something fast and complex, surprise, recalculation, recovery, in about 2 seconds. "Serena, hey, we were just—" "Grandma," I said, "can I see what you're looking at?" Dorothy looked at me. Her eyes were tired in the way a person's eyes get tired when they have been managing something alone. She pushed the document toward me across the table. I picked it up. It was a new document, not the original one Gerald had sent. This one was simpler, shorter, more disguised. It was structured as a healthcare and financial proxy, something that sounded protective, But the financial authority clauses buried in the second page gave Gerald broad discretionary control over her liquid accounts in the event of incapacity, with language so loosely defined that a competent attorney could argue almost any circumstance qualified. It was better drafted than the original. Someone had spent money on this version. I set it down. "Grandma," I said, "do you want to sign this?" Dorothy looked at me. Then she looked at Gerald. Then she looked back at me. "No," she said, "I don't." Gerald's posture shifted. "Mama, this is just a protection." She said no, Gerald. Something happened in Gerald's face that I had never seen before. The performance dropped. Not all the way, but enough. "Serena, I don't know what you've been filling her head with, but this is a family matter, and you are one grandchild who has—" "I'm her trustee," I said. The room went completely still. Gerald stared at me. "Her legally appointed trustee. The estate documents were finalized 4 months ago with James Beaumont's office in Jackson. I have copies, her attorney has the originals. The structure is filed and complete." I paused. "You are welcome to call Mr. Beaumont's office in the morning to confirm." Gerald was very quiet for a very long moment. Then he said, in a voice I'd never heard from him before, low, stripped of the performance, "What exactly did she put in those documents? That's a conversation between Grandma and her attorney, not between you and me." He stood up from the table. Renata appeared in the doorway from the living room, reading the energy. Gerald looked at his mother. "Mama," he said, and his voice had something in it now that was neither warmth nor performance. "I hope you know what you've done." Dorothy looked at her son with the clear, steady eyes of a woman who had been reading people her entire life and never once been confused about what she was seeing. "I know exactly what I've done, Gerald," she said. "I've always known." He and Renata left the next morning. Dorothy and I sat on the porch that evening and watched the sun go down over the Mississippi fields, and she said, "I'm tired, baby." "I know," I said. "Not in a bad way, just tired of carrying it quietly. It's better now that you're carrying it too." I reached over and held her hand. We watched the light go until it was gone. Dorothy passed away 7 months later. I am going to say that plainly and without softening it, because she deserves plainness. She was 80 years old. Her heart, which had carried everything it had carried for 8 decades, decided it was finished. She went in her sleep, in her house, in the town where she had been born and taught and built and loved. I was the one who found her. Sunday morning. I had driven down the night before. I sat with her for a while before I called anyone. I just sat with her, in the quiet of the house where I had learned to read Money and Love at the same kitchen table, with the Mississippi morning coming through the curtains she'd had for 20 years. Then I made the calls. The reading of the will was 3 weeks later at James Beaumont's office in Jackson. My mother was there. Gerald and Renata flew in from Atlanta. Winston drove from Nashville. There were cousins, a few family friends. I sat in the back of the room. James Beaumont read the document with the steady, practiced calm of a man who has done this many times and understands that a room full of family and a will creates a specific kind of weather. The specific bequests came first: charitable gifts to Dorothy's church, to her elementary school's library fund, small personal items designated to specific people. Then the monetary gifts: $100,000 to Claudette Mabry Cole, $100,000 to Gerald Mabry, $100,000 to Winston Mabry. Gerald's posture when he heard his name and his amount shifted in a way that I watched carefully. The math was happening behind his eyes. $100,000, out of whatever he believed Dorothy was worth. Then James Beaumont read the trust provisions. The remaining estate, the investment portfolio, the property, the accounts totaling approximately $4,800,000 established in the Dorothy E. Mabry Living Trust was designated to its named trustee and primary beneficiary. He said my name. Gerald stood up before Beaumont finished the sentence. "Excuse me?" he said. "I'm sorry, can you repeat that?" Beaumont repeated it, steady, unhurried. That can't be right." Gerald's voice had gone tight. "I'm her son. Winston is her son. Claudette is her daughter. You're telling me a granddaughter gets—" "Mr. Mabry," Beaumont said, "the documents are clear and legally sound. Your mother executed these with full capacity, witnessed and notarized, with independent review from a second attorney. The designations reflect her documented wishes." Gerald turned and looked at me across the room. I met his gaze. I didn't look away. I just looked at him the way my grandmother had always looked at things she'd already understood. "You did this," he said. "You manipulated her. You got in her ear and you—" "Gerald," my mother's voice. Claudette, who had always been warm and scattered, was very still. "Stop." "Claudette?" "Stop." Firmer. "Dorothy made her own choices. She always made her own choices. That's who she was." A pause. "You know that." Gerald sat down. Renata was very quiet. Winston was looking at the floor. The room had the specific gravity of a truth that is too large to argue with. Here is where I have to tell you the hardest part of this story, because it didn't end cleanly in that room. Gerald contested the will. He filed a challenge in the Chancery Court in Hinds County, claiming undue influence, specifically that I had manipulated Dorothy in her final years and was improperly inserted into a position of trust. I want to be honest about what this period felt like. It felt like being accused of loving someone wrong. It felt like the 14 years of Sunday drives and kitchen table conversations and balanced fake checkbooks and 4-hour estate planning sessions being held up to a light designed to make them look sinister. It felt like the worst kind of grief, the kind where you're fighting to protect the truth of someone you loved while you're still raw from losing them. But here is the thing about documentation. Documentation doesn't grieve. It doesn't get tired. It doesn't doubt itself at 2 in the morning. I had documentation. I had 4 months of correspondence between Dorothy and James Beaumont's office. I had the second attorney's independent review. I had the letter Dorothy had written, in her own hand, notarized, explaining her decision with specific, articulate reasoning, including a direct reference to Gerald's attempt to have her sign the proxy document and her documented refusal. Dorothy knew Gerald might contest it. She had prepared for that too, because she was Dorothy Eugenia Mabry, and she had always understood that the most important thing about a decision is that you make it before someone can tell you it's too late. The contest was dismissed after 4 months. The judge's written ruling included a note, rare in these proceedings, that the documentation of the decedent's intent was, and I am paraphrasing, among the most thorough and clearly established she had encountered in a challenge of this nature. I framed that too. It's next to Dorothy's instruction letter in my office. I want to stop here and give you something real, because this channel is about more than the drama. What Dorothy did, building her estate documents before the pressure came, including a personal letter of intent, getting an independent second review, naming a trustee she actually trusted, these are not extraordinary things. They are things any person with assets and family can do. The tragedy in stories like this is usually not a lack of love. It's a lack of documentation. Love doesn't hold up in Chancery Court. Documentation does. If you have someone in your life who is elderly, who has assets, who has family members circling in ways that feel off, get ahead of it. Talk to an estate attorney, not Gerald's Marcus Webb, a real independent attorney. The conversation costs less than you think. The silence costs more than you can imagine. That's the value I needed to give you today, because Dorothy built something real and she protected it in time. Not everyone gets that chance. This is Soulful Drama Stories. Please subscribe if you haven't. Please share this story with someone who needs it. Leave me a comment. What do you want to protect? I will read every one. Now let me tell you where I am, because the story doesn't end in the courtroom. The story ends in the life. It is 14 months after Dorothy's passing. I am 28 years old. I left Presley and Dunn 8 months ago. I started a firm. I named it Mabry Wealth Advisory. I named it after her, not after me. After the woman who taught me that money was a record of decisions and that the best decisions were made quietly, deliberately, and early enough that nobody could interfere. The firm specializes in estate planning and financial literacy for Black families, for first-generation wealth builders, for the people who are building something real that they need to protect before the Gerald Mabrys of the world show up with a fruit basket and a man in a gray suit. We have a specific program, 3 hours of free consultation for any family caring for an elderly relative with substantial assets who needs to understand their options before someone else defines those options for them. We are 8 months old. We have 31 clients. We have already, in those 8 months, helped 4 families establish proper estate documents before a will contest became necessary. 4 families, 14 conversations at kitchen tables that felt like the ones Dorothy and I used to have. I think about her every single day. I want to tell you about the check, because you've been waiting and you deserve the full story. The week after Dorothy's passing, before the will reading, before the contest, there was a gathering at the house in Greenwood, family coming through to pay respects. Cousins, neighbors, women from Dorothy's church who brought enough food to feed the county. I was in the kitchen helping receive everything. I stepped into the hallway bathroom to wash my hands, and through the thin walls of that old house, I heard Gerald and Renata in the back bedroom. Gerald's voice, low and tight. Beaumont's office sent over the estate summary. There's a check. She had a cashier's check cut before she died, 5 million even from the investment liquidation. If we can get to it before, the sound of paper. Tearing. Jorana. It doesn't matter. It's not real until it's processed. If we can argue it was issued before proper establishment, we might have grounds. You just tore. It doesn't matter. Gerald, listen to me. We can still. I stood there in that hallway for 11 seconds. The water was off. I had heard everything. And the reason I stood there for exactly 11 seconds is because I was deciding how I felt, not what I was going to do. I already knew what I was going to do, but how I felt, because I wanted to carry the feeling accurately. I didn't want to remember this moment as more rage than it was, or more grief than it was. What it was simple. It was confirmation. Everything I had done in the previous 4 months, every document, every conversation, every Sunday drive, every hour at that kitchen table, had been the right thing. The check they tore was not the estate. The cashier's check was a preliminary instrument from the investment firm, issued as part of the transition process, that had already been logged, documented, and tracked in the trust administration file. Tearing it didn't erase it. It only existed on paper. The account it represented existed in a system. The next morning, I called James Beaumont's office and reported what I had heard, including the destruction of the document. I called the investment firm and notified that the physical check had been destroyed and requested a replacement be issued through proper channels. The replacement was processed within 48 hours. 2 mornings later, my phone rang at 7:41 a.m. It was the bank. The trust account had been properly flagged and secured. The replacement instrument had been issued. The accounts were exactly as they should be. Ms. Maberthole, the banker said, everything is in order on our end. We just wanted to confirm that you're aware the account is fully secured and all attempted access by unauthorized parties has been logged. Attempted access. Logged. I sat at my kitchen table with my morning coffee going cold, and I said, thank you. Yes, I'm aware. I hung up. And then I did something I had not allowed myself to do through any of the investigations, the legal process, the will contest, the 11 seconds in the hallway. I cried. Not because I was broken, because I was relieved. Because Dorothy had planned far enough ahead that even this, even the tearing of a check by her own son in the back bedroom of her house on the day people came to mourn her, couldn't reach what she had built. She had closed every door before anyone knew the doors existed. I cried because she had trusted me to hold the key, and I had not dropped it. Gerald's contest failed. His attorney's fees were substantial. The financial outcome for Gerald and Renata, who had come to Greenwood expecting access to millions, was $100,000 and a legal bill that erased a significant portion of it. I did not feel triumphant about that. I felt finished, the way a sentence feels when the period lands in exactly the right place. My mother called me the week after the contest was dismissed. Claudette, warm and scattered and real. "Baby," she said, "I need to tell you something." "Okay." "Your grandmother told me, about 2 months before she passed. She told me what she was doing and why. She told me she was leaving the trust to you." A pause. She asked me if I was okay with it. I hadn't known that. "What did you say?" I asked. "I said yes," my mother said. "I said it made sense. You were always the one she could trust with it. Not because she loved you more, because she knew what you'd do with it." My mother was quiet for a moment. "She was right," Claudette said. "Wasn't she?" "I'm trying to be," I said. "Baby, you started a firm and named it after her. You're helping families protect what they've built. That's not trying, that's doing." I thought about the kitchen table, the fake checkbooks, Dorothy's voice. Money is just a record of decisions. She built the floor. "And you built the building," my mother said. "That's how it's supposed to go." I want to tell you about the letter. The one Dorothy wrote. The one that's framed on my office wall. I won't read you the whole thing because it's mine and hers, and some things belong to the people they were written for. But there's one line that I look at every morning when I sit down at my desk. It says, "Serena knows where everything is. She also knows why everything matters. That combination is rarer than money and worth more than any of it." I look at that line every morning, and then I get to work. Here is what I want to leave you with. Not the drama, not Gerald and Renata and the check tearing in the failed contest. What I want to leave you with is Dorothy. Dorothy, who clipped coupons when she didn't have to, who drove the same Honda for 11 years, who reinvested land sale money instead of spending it, who knew her own mind so clearly that when her son sent a man in a gray suit, she didn't need me to tell her what she was looking at. She already knew. She'd always known. What she needed was someone to stand beside her who also knew. Someone who would show up on Sundays and sit at the table and carry the weight of the truth with her so she didn't have to carry it alone. That's what she chose me for. Not because I was the smartest, not because I was the most successful, because I showed up, because I paid attention, because when she said, "What do you think?" I told her the actual truth, even when the truth was uncomfortable, even when the truth had my uncle's name on it. The people who took from Dorothy, who tried to take from her, were counting on several things. They were counting on her being too old to fight back. Wrong. They were counting on her being isolated. Wrong. They were counting on the documentation being incomplete. Wrong. And above everything else, they were counting on me being the manageable granddaughter, the one who would be grateful for whatever amount they decided to pass along, the one who, as Gerald said, didn't have experience with this level of asset management. Bless his heart. I had been sitting at this table since I was 12 years old, learning exactly this level of asset management from the most extraordinary woman I have ever known. And when the moment came, when the water cut off and the sound of tearing paper came through the wall, I had everything I needed because Dorothy had made sure of it. And I had shown up for every Sunday. That is the whole lesson. All of it in 4 words. Show up, pay attention. Show up for the people you love before there's a crisis that makes showing up feel obvious. Pay attention to the things that don't reconcile, the explanations that feel too easy, the numbers that don't settle comfortably, the pressure to sign things before you've read them. And if you are the Dorothy in this story, if you are building something real and you have people in your life who are circling it, Find your Serena, the one who will sit at the table and tell you the actual truth. Get the documents in order before the pressure comes. Write the letter. Make the call to the attorney this week, not next month. The Georgia O'Keeffe quote says, "I've been absolutely terrified every moment of my life, and I've never let it keep me from doing a single thing I wanted to do." Dorothy Eugenia Mabry was not terrified. She was prepared. There is a difference, and the difference is everything. Thank you for staying all the way through this story. If Dorothy's story landed somewhere real in you, if you have been the one holding the key for someone you love, or the one who needed someone to hold it, leave me a comment right now. Tell me who your Dorothy is. Tell me what you're protecting. Tell me what Sunday morning feels like in your house. This is Soulful Drama Stories. We're a community for people who believe that the truth, properly documented, properly protected, and properly timed, will always outlast the lie. If you are not subscribed yet, please do it right now and turn on the notification bell. We have more stories coming, and every single one is built for the person who needed to hear exactly this at exactly this moment. You didn't just watch a story today. You watched a woman build a floor and another woman build a building on top of it. Now go protect what's always been yours. See you in the next one.